Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Welcome! Today we're doing a deep dive into Japanese history, zeroing in on the Higashiyama period, a really fascinating time for cultural development.
Absolutely. We'll be looking at how the arts and aesthetics weren't just, highbrow pursuits for the elite. They actually reshaped how people lived day to day.
Yeah, and you'll see how so much from that era still echoes in Japan today. It's quite remarkable. Okay, so let's get into it. The Higashiyama period really picks up steam after the chaos of the Onin War. What really kicked things off?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, how one person's actions can really set the tone. After the war, the shogun, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, basically retired. He went off to his villa in the eastern hills of Kyoto.
Whoa, Higashiyama, the Eastern Hills.
Exactly. And that move, that retreat eastward, it
Mhm.
became, well, the heart of a whole new cultural wave.
And part of that retreat was building something pretty famous, wasn't it? Something meant to rival his grandfather's golden pavilion.
That's right. He spent something like 7 years building the Ginkaku, the silver pavilion, at Jishoji Temple. Definitely inspired by Yoshimitsu's Kinkaku, the golden one.
But they represent very different things, culturally speaking.
Huge difference. Kinkaku was all about the flash, the opulence of the earlier Kiriyama culture. Ginkaku and Higashiyama culture with it aimed for something else entirely. Simpler, maybe deeper. A kind of profound elegance.
So the name Higashiyama culture literally comes from those hills and the vibe of the Ginkaku.
Pretty much, yeah. The style, the principles you see in the Ginkaku, they kind of define the whole cultural mood of the time. That's where the name stuck.
And it's quite telling that it's the silver pavilion, but, well, it was never actually covered in silver, was it?
It wasn't. And that detail speaks volumes. It hints strongly that the finances weren't quite the same as in Yoshimitsu's day.
A different economic reality compared to Kitayama.
For sure. But that didn't seem to stop the cultural innovation. If anything, it maybe pushed it in directions that were less about pure expense and more about refinement and integrating with life.
Okay, let's talk architecture. The Ginkaku wasn't just a copy of older styles, right? It represented something new.
Definitely not a copy. It's a really key example of what's called Shoinzukuri architecture, which was quite a shift from the older Shindenzukuri style.
How so? What's the main difference?
Think more functional layouts, less overtly grand or purely ceremonial spaces, more focus on, well, living spaces and a kind of understated design.
It wasn't just the Ginkaku. There's another building there at Jishoji that's really important for understanding this Shonzukuri aesthetic.
Yes, the Tagudo Hall. And specifically inside it, the Dojin-sai study. It's tiny, just 4.5 tatami mats.
Wow, that's small.
Yeah. And it features things like a tana, these specially designed shelves, often asymmetrical, for displaying just a few beautiful objects, and a tuki shoin, a built-in desk.
So very curated, intentional.
Exactly. That simplicity, that refined taste you see in Tagudo and Ginkaku, that's the core of Higashiyama culture right there.
And the style, Shoinzukuri, it didn't just stay with the shogun, did it? It spread.
Oh, absolutely. It's actually amazing how widely it was adopted. Samurai, monks, aristocrats, they all started building in this style.
And it had a lasting impact.
Hugely lasting. Key elements of Shoinzukuri, like having raised floors or that built-in suke shoin desk area, they became fundamental features of traditional Japanese houses, stuff we still recognize today.
Incredible. That features of modern homes trace back to the 15th century. What about the gardens? Did they change to match?
They did. They were designed to really harmonize with the Shoinzukuri buildings. This period saw a big emphasis on karasansui.
Dry landscape gardens, rocks and gravel.
Exactly. Using rocks, sand, gravel, moss to represent larger landscapes, mountains, water, islands. Very abstract, very symbolic, meant for contemplation.
Okay, so architecture and gardens were evolving. But Higashiyama is also famous for arts like the tea ceremony and flower arranging taking off.
Oh, absolutely central. The idea of finding sort of inner peace through preparing and drinking tea, wabi-sabi, and the formal art of flower arrangement, tatehana, they really blossomed during this time.
Let's start with tea. Wabi-sabi sounds very different from just, grabbing a cuppa. Where did it come from?
Well, interestingly, it grew out of something called tocha, which were basically tea-tasting games. People would bet on identifying different teas.
Really? Like competitions?
Yeah. But then figures like Murata Juko started transforming it, shifting the focus away from just competition towards a more mindful spiritual practice.
And that development continued.
It did. Takano Joe of Sakai pushed it further. And then the big name everyone knows is Sen no Rikyu. He's the one credited with really perfecting it into Kano-yu, the way of tea.
He codified the rules and aesthetics we know today.
Pretty much, yeah. The rituals, the philosophy, the whole aesthetic, a lot of that comes down to Rikyu.
Okay, and parallel to this, flower arranging, ikebana, was also developing.
Yes. Its roots are in kyuij floral offerings at Buddhist altars. But it evolved into tatahana, a more formal style for decorating rooms, particularly the tokonoma alcove.
And did the popularity of the tea ceremony influence flower arranging?
It did. A simpler, more naturalistic style called nagare, which kind of means thrown in, became popular, especially for tea gatherings. It felt less rigid, more spontaneous.
Were there famous masters of flower arranging back then?
There were. Someone called Dorami, who was one of the shogun's artistic attendants, the goboshu, was known for tatahana, and also priests from the Ikenobo school based at Rokukudo Temple in Kyoto, like Senkei and Seno. The Ikenobo school is still huge today.
Right. Now, visual arts, ink wash painting, subakuga, seems to have really hit its stride in Higashiyama.
It certainly did. It had roots in the earlier Kitayama period, but it became the style for decorating those tokonoma alcoves and the fusuma sliding doors in these new shoinzukuri spaces.
The monochrome style fit the aesthetic.
Perfectly. That understated, refined sensibility of Higashiyama, ink wash painting was just ideal for it.
And there's one massive figure associated with subakuga from this time.
Oh yeah, Sesshu, a monk painter from Shokugudi Temple in Kyoto. He's legendary.
What made him stand out?
Well, for one thing, he actually traveled to Ming China, studied painting techniques there, absorbed them, and then brought them back and perfected ink landscape painting in a Japanese context. His work is incredibly powerful, still revered.
Wow, traveling all the way to China back then was a huge undertaking. What about the more traditional Japanese painting style, Yamatoi? Did it just fade away?
Not at all. Actually, something really interesting happened. The Kano school emerged, founded by Kano Masanobu and his son Motonobu.
And what was their approach?
They cleverly blended the techniques of subokuga, the ink wash methods, with the vibrant colors and narrative focus of traditional Yamatoi. It created this really dynamic new style.
A fusion, almost.
Exactly. And it wasn't just painting. Other crafts were advancing too.
Like
metalworking saw great strides with artists like Goto Yujo. And Meiki, that incredible technique of decorating lacquerware with gold or silver powder, saw significant development too, all contributing to this rich visual culture.
So clearly the elite were driving a lot of this, but you mentioned earlier this culture wasn't just confined to them. How did it reach ordinary people?
That's maybe the most important part of the story. These developments, tea, flowers, architecture, they weren't just in palaces. They genuinely filtered down and shaped everyday life. We see direct lines to modern Japanese lifestyle in clothing, food, housing.
Can you give some examples? How did aristocratic or samurai culture get adopted by commoners?
Sure. Look at annual events. Things like the Bon Festival in summer or taking an iris bath in May. These customs, with roots in elite practices, became widespread popular traditions.
Okay, what about more tangible things like clothing?
Yeah, clothing's a great example. Samurai clothing became simpler, and that influenced what everyone wore. Plus, commoners were getting a bit more economic clout, so styles started to merge more. You see things like the suo becoming common for men, and women wearing the kosode more loosely. Changes in belts, hairstyles, even makeup. And a big factor was cotton coming in from Korea. It became the main material, making clothes more accessible, perhaps.
And food. Did that change, too?
Definitely. Cuisine from Zen Buddhist temples, their cooking methods, started spreading, first to the aristocracy and samurai, then to commoners. This helped establish things like standard meal settings, specific tableware, dining etiquette.
So the beginnings of what we think of as Japanese cuisine.
You could say that. Rice consumption went up, gruel became popular. These are foundational shifts.
And housing for commoners. Did shoinzukuri influence their homes too?
Not directly in the same way, no. There was still a big difference between commoners' row houses, often with thatched roofs, and the grander residences of the elite. But the constant warfare and fires meant even elite houses sometimes got simpler out of necessity.
Any other changes in daily life for commoners?
Well, one small but significant thing, they started using oil lamps, fueled by perilla oil. Better lighting, changing the rhythm of the evening.
It sounds like a time of real mixing and matching between social classes. Did this lead to new kinds of entertainment for commoners?
Absolutely. As commoners gained status, they got more involved culturally. So Rogaku no, developed by Zeami, wasn't just for the elite anymore. City dwellers loved it too.
Wasn't there another type of no popular in the countryside?
Yeah, Dengaku no. It was apparently more rustic, maybe more openly entertaining. Farmers seemed to prefer it. There's even a story about nobles being really impressed watching farmers perform no at a festival out in Izumi.
It shows how skill wasn't just confined to the capital or the upper classes.
Exactly. And beyond, no, you had lots of folk performing arts where commoners were the main participants. Things like bonodori dancing and butsu odori, furyu odori, mass participation stuff.
What about comedy?
Kyogen. The comedic plays often performed between no acts. They used everyday language, folk songs, people loved them. Very accessible.
And literature. Did commoners start showing up in stories more?
They did. You get these short illustrated stories called odagizoshi, famous ones like Isunboshi, the one-inch boy tale. Often the heroes were commoners, reflecting simple dreams and struggles.
Any other popular forms?
Yeah, kojururi, small-scale storytelling, often with shamisen music. And popular songs, fushi. Even the Kokin Wakashu, a famous poetry anthology, was reissued as a collection of popular songs around this time. It shows how commoner tastes were shaping the cultural landscape, all part of the Higashiyama Foundation.
Let's switch back to poetry for a moment. Renga, linked verse, was already big. How did it fare after the Onin War?
It got a major boost, actually. A poet named Sogi was key. He established the Shofu school of Renga, traveled all over Japan, and compiled a new imperial anthology, the Shinsen Tsukubashu. He really helped elevate popular Renga into a serious art form.
And these poets traveled a lot.
They did. Many relied on support from regional lords, daimyo, and kokujin. So they acted as cultural messengers, in a way, spreading literary ideas across the country.
But then a different, maybe easier form of linked verse appeared.
Right. Haikai Renga. Credited to Yamazaki Soken. It was much freer, funnier, less bound by strict rules.
More accessible.
Definitely. People from all classes enjoyed it. It paved the way for later forms like haiku, really.
So, amidst all this new stuff, what were the more traditional groups doing, like the old aristocracy?
Well, their political power was waning, so they kind of doubled down on preserving tradition. Lots of focus on Yusoku Kujitsu, the intricate knowledge of court ceremony etiquette, old customs. People like Ichiyo Kaneyoshi were major scholars in this area.
Trying to maintain their cultural authority, perhaps?
Yeah.
And religion. Any new movements?
There was Yuitsu Shinto, pushed by Yoshida Kenetomo. It tried to blend Shinto with Confucianism and Buddhism, partly maybe to compete with the established Issei Shinto.
Interesting mix. Now, we've talked a lot about Kyoto, but you mentioned culture spreading. How did that happen, especially with the Onin War damaging the capital?
The war was actually a catalyst. Culture had been spreading outwards through the Muromachi period anyway, as regional lords got stronger. But when Kyoto was devastated, lots of nobles, monks, artists fled the capital.
Seeking refuge.
Exactly. They went to patrons in the provinces, regional daimyo and kokujin, and they brought their culture, their knowledge, their skills with them. It really accelerated the spread.
Were there specific places that became new cultural hotspots?
Oh, yes. Yamaguchi, the castle town of the Uchi clan in western Japan, became hugely important. People called it the Kyoto of the West.
Why Yamaguchi?
The Uchis were incredibly wealthy, partly because they dominated trade with Ming China for a while. They could afford to patronize arts and scholarship. Sesshu, the painter, spent time there.
Any other examples?
Sure. The Kikuchi clan in Higo, the Shimazu and Satsuma down in Kyushu, they invited Zen monks like Kian Ginju who promoted Confucian studies. This laid the groundwork for later Neo-Confucian schools like the Sanin school. In Tosa, the Murabaikins started the Nangaku school.
And up in the Kanto region.
The Ashikaga school there really flourished in the mid-15th century, thanks to support from the Sugi Norizai. It became a major center of learning, drawing students from all over. A Jesuit missionary later called it the University of Bando, Bando being the old name for Kanto.
So, quite a dispersal of learning and culture. What about basic education for, say, samurai kids or merchants?
For samurai sons, education often happened in temples, using texts like the Taika no Rai for ethics and conduct, or the Joshikimoku, the old warrior code. Practical stuff.
And for city folk, merchants, artisans.
They increasingly needed to read, write, and do basic math for business. This led to things like the Setsuyoshu being published. It was an early Japanese dictionary, arranged in a Roha order, which was helpful for learning.
So literacy was spreading.
Gradually, yes. Even in villages, leaders needed some literacy and numeracy for record-keeping and administration. Written knowledge was slowly trickling down.
Okay, last big topic, Buddhism. How did the different schools fare during Higashiyama?
It was a dynamic period for Buddhism, too. The established Kamakura schools kept gaining followers across society. But the official Shogunate-backed Gozan Zen system started to lose some influence.
And what rose in its place?
More independent Zen sects, the Rinka schools, Rinzai and Soto. They focused more on spreading out into the regions, connecting with local samurai and commoners.
Any key temples or figures?
For Soto Zen, Iheiji and Sojiji remained crucial. For Rinzai, Daikokuji and Myoshinji in Kyoto became very influential. And a really famous figure from Daitokuji was the eccentric monk Ikkyu Sojun.
What about the Pure Land schools?
Jodo, the Pure Land sect, kept its strong ties with the Kyoto aristocracy, but also pushed its missionary work eastward. But the really explosive growth was in Jodo Shinshu, the true Pure Land sect, often called the Eco sect.
Who were they reaching?
Huge numbers of farmers especially, but also merchants, artisans, more mobile people. Under their leader Renyo, the Honganji branch became incredibly powerful, setting up strong bases, particularly in Hokuriku, Tokai, and the Kinai regions near Kyoto.
They became quite a force, didn't they? Known for uprisings later.
Yes, their organization and influence were substantial. And we also see the Nichiren sect expanding westward, finding followers among city dwellers and some aristocrats too.
Wow. So wrapping this up, the Higashiyama period was clearly incredibly pivotal. Artistic ideas didn't just stay in temples or palaces. They genuinely seeped into everyday life.
Absolutely. Architecture, gardens, tea, flowers, painting, even clothes and food, the legacy is immense and lasting. And crucially, common people weren't just passive recipients. They actively participated, adapted these forms, and created their own cultural expressions too.
It really set the stage for so much that followed.
It did. So, as you continue exploring Japanese history, maybe keep an eye out for that particular Higashiyama balance, that blend of refined simplicity and profound elegance. Think about how it continues to shape Japanese aesthetics and values even now. What other echoes of this fascinating era might you notice in modern Japan?